I heard my son say he was ashamed of me. The boy I raised, the boy I gave everything for, spoke those words like I was nothing. And in that moment, something inside me broke. My name's David, I'm 68 years old, and after that night I made a choice no one could have predicted. I sold the $2 million house I built with my own 2 hands, and I disappeared. Don't forget to subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I had just returned from my weekly grocery run, my old pickup truck loaded down with enough food to feed a small army, just like I'd been doing every Tuesday for the past 5 years since Marcus and his family moved into the neighborhood. I always bought the expensive stuff too. Prime ribeye steaks, organic vegetables, that fancy imported cheese Jennifer liked, craft beer for Marcus, and those ridiculously overpriced snacks Emma couldn't live without. Money was never an issue. Not after 45 years of hard work in construction, building my way up from a day laborer to owning my own successful contracting company. I'd built the $2 million house we were living in with my own 2 hands, every beam, every tile, every crown molding placed with the kind of skill only decades of experience can give. As I carried the bags up the front steps, I heard Marcus's voice coming through the living room window. He was on the phone, and something in his tone made me stop cold. It wasn't his usual smooth lawyer voice. This was sharper, harsher, personal. I set the groceries down quietly and listened, because something in me already knew this wasn't going to end well. And I was right. Let me tell you about the foundation this family was built on, because Marcus seems to have forgotten where he came from and what it took to get him where he is today. When Marcus was just 7 years old, his mother Sarah died in a car accident that turned my world upside down and left me a widower with a young boy to raise and no idea how I was going to manage it all. But I figured it out, because that's what fathers do. We figure it out. I was working construction then, just a regular crew member, making decent but not great money. And suddenly I had to be both mother and father to a boy who'd lost the most important person in his world. I took on extra jobs, working weekends, holidays. Anytime someone needed skilled hands to build something solid and lasting, while other men my age were relaxing with beers and watching television, I was framing houses, laying foundations, installing roofing, learning every trade I could get my hands on, because every new skill meant more money, and more money meant a better life for Marcus. I remember those early years so clearly, coming home covered in sawdust and concrete dust, my hands cracked and bleeding from the physical labor, only to help Marcus with his homework at the kitchen table I'd built myself from reclaimed oak. I enrolled him in the best private school in the district, a place that cost more per year than I used to make in 2 years. But I didn't care about the sacrifice, because I could see how smart he was, how much potential he had. The other parents at that school looked down on me during parent-teacher conferences, this rough-edged construction worker among their ranks of doctors and lawyers and business executives. But Marcus was getting straight A's, and that's all that mattered to me. When he was 16, he told me he wanted to go to Harvard Law School, and I made him a promise that night that I've regretted every day since. I told him that no matter what it cost, no matter what I had to sacrifice, he would get that education. I sold my father's vintage car collection, 12 beautiful classic automobiles that had been in our family for generations, cars that were worth more than most people's houses, and I used every penny of that money to pay for his undergraduate degree and law school tuition. $460,000 gone in 4 years. But watching Marcus graduate summa cum laude from Harvard made every sacrifice worth it. Or so I thought at the time. Looking back now with clear eyes, I can see the pattern that's been developing for years, The slow erosion of respect and gratitude that I was too blind to notice because I loved my son too much to accept what was happening right in front of me. It started small, little things that I dismissed as normal growing pains of a successful young man finding his place in the world. Marcus began making excuses to avoid our traditional Sunday family dinners, claiming he was too busy with important cases at his law firm, too sophisticated now for simple home-cooked meals with his old man. When he did show up, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, making it clear that being there was an obligation rather than something he enjoyed. Jennifer, his wife, started making subtle comments about the house, about how rustic everything was, how different it was from their friends' homes with their modern, minimalist designs purchased from expensive interior decorators. She'd run her perfectly manicured fingers along the hand-carved banister I'd spent months perfecting and make little comments about how charming it was in a tone that suggested it was anything but charming. Marcus would laugh along with her observations, agreeing that maybe it was time to update some things to make the house more contemporary and appropriate for entertaining. The word appropriate stung every time he said it, as if the home I'd built with love and skill wasn't good enough for his new circle of friends and colleagues. Then there were the social events, the few times Marcus actually invited me to functions with his professional circle. I'd dress in my best clothes, the expensive suits I'd bought specifically for these occasions, trying my best to fit in with people who lived in a world I'd never been part of. But I could feel their eyes on me, could hear the whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, could sense the way they looked at my hands, still calloused and scarred from decades of honest work, as if those scars were something to be ashamed of rather than badges of honor representing a lifetime of building things that would last for generations. Marcus would introduce me as his father, but never mention what I did for a living, never acknowledge that the successful law practice he was so proud of had been built on the foundation of my sacrifices and hard work. Instead, he'd quickly change the subject, steering conversations away from anything that might reveal his blue-collar roots, as if being the son of a construction worker was some dirty secret that needed to be hidden from polite society. As I stood there on my own front porch, grocery bags growing heavier by the second, Marcus continued his phone conversation, unaware that every word was driving a knife deeper into my heart and changing our relationship forever. The problem is managing his image around my colleagues, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the clinical tone he used when discussing legal strategy. You know how it is in corporate law. Appearance matters. And having a father who works with his hands doesn't exactly project the right image for someone trying to make partner. I felt my legs go weak as the full scope of his betrayal began to sink in. This wasn't just casual embarrassment or mild discomfort with our different lifestyles. This was calculated shame, strategic distancing designed to protect his precious reputation at my expense. Jennifer and I have been discussing our options, he went on, clearly feeling comfortable sharing intimate family details with whoever was on the other end of that phone. We're thinking it might be time to help him transition into a more appropriate living situation, maybe one of those nice retirement communities where he'd be around people more his own age and social class. Somewhere he'd be comfortable, and we wouldn't have to worry about him saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. The retirement community comment hit me like a physical blow. They'd been planning my exile, discussing my future as if I was some inconvenient problem to be managed and contained, rather than the man who'd given them everything they had. The house situation is complicated, though, Marcus continued, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. He built this place himself, and he's emotionally attached to it, but honestly, it's becoming embarrassing to have clients or partners over when the whole house screams, blue-collar construction worker. The craftsmanship is good, I'll give him that, but it's just not sophisticated enough for the kind of entertaining we need to do for my career. Sophisticated enough? 40 years of skilled labor, of learning every aspect of construction and design, of creating something beautiful and functional and lasting, and it wasn't sophisticated enough for my son's delicate sensibilities. The house I'd built as a legacy for him, a testament to what a man could accomplish with determination and skill, had become nothing more than an embarrassment he wanted to hide from his important friends. "We're hoping to convince him that selling would be the smart financial move," Marcus said, and I could hear the manipulation in his voice even through my shock and hurt. "Put the money in some safe investments. Let us handle the details. Make sure he's taken care of, but not in a way that impacts our lifestyle or professional obligations." The phone conversation ended, but I remained frozen on my porch, my mind racing through years of interactions with my family, seeing them now through the harsh lens of truth rather than the soft focus of parental love and hope. Jennifer's behavior, which I'd attributed to nervousness or social awkwardness, suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't awkward around me, she was embarrassed by me. All those eye rolls when I talked about my work, all those subtle redirections when conversations turned to my background or experiences, all those times she'd suddenly remembered pressing engagements whenever I suggested family activities or outings. She hadn't been managing social anxiety. She'd been managing me, trying to minimize my presence in their lives and limit the potential damage my existence might cause to their carefully cultivated image. And Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, whose college fund I'd been contributing to since she was born. I remembered our last conversation, just 2 weeks ago, when she'd rolled her eyes and walked away, when I tried to tell her about the scholarship opportunities available for students whose grandparents were union members. She'd dismissed my story about how I'd worked my way through night school while raising her father as ancient history that had no relevance to her modern life. When I'd offered to help pay for her college expenses, she'd barely looked up from her phone to mumble a disinterested thanks, as if my financial support was her natural right rather than a generous gift from someone who'd already sacrificed everything for her father's education. The family dinners I'd been hosting every Sunday for 5 years took on a sinister new meaning as I realized they weren't coming because they enjoyed my company or valued our family time together. They were coming because I provided free, expensive food and a convenient place to do their laundry and use my workshop and tools for various projects around their own house. I'd been nothing more than a service provider, a convenient resource to be exploited for practical benefits while being kept at arm's length from their real lives, their important friendships, their professional aspirations. Every gift I'd given, every bill I'd paid, every favor I'd done had been accepted not with gratitude, but with the casual entitlement of people who believed they deserved everything I provided, simply by virtue of being related to me. The expensive steaks in my hands, purchased with money I'd earned through honest labor, were just another example of how I'd allowed myself to be used by people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM with embarrassing social tendencies that needed to be managed and contained. I carried those grocery bags into the house and set them down on the kitchen counter I'd built with my own hands, the solid oak surface smooth and warm under my trembling fingers, as I tried to process the magnitude of what I'd just learned about the people I loved most in the world. The kitchen around me, with its custom cabinets and hand-forged hardware, suddenly felt different, hollow somehow, as if the love and pride I'd poured into every detail had been drained away by the bitter truth of my family's real feelings about me and everything I'd accomplished. I sat down at the breakfast table, another piece I'd crafted myself from reclaimed barnwood, and stared at the family photos covering the walls, images that now seemed like elaborate lies, documenting relationships that had never really existed the way I'd believed they did. There was Marcus's graduation photo, him in his cap and gown, me standing proudly beside him in my best suit, my arm around his shoulders, both of us smiling at what I thought was a moment of shared triumph. But now I could see something different in his expression, a subtle distance, a barely perceptible impatience with the whole ceremony of acknowledging my role in his success. There was Emma's 16th birthday party, me presenting her with the car keys to the restored 1967 Mustang I'd spent 6 months rebuilding for her. Hours of meticulous work to create something special and meaningful. In the photo, she's smiling, but I could see now that it was the polite, practiced smile of someone accepting a gift they didn't really want from someone whose approval they didn't particularly value. Every photo told the same story. Once I had the key to reading them correctly, I'd been living in a fantasy, believing in family bonds that existed only in my imagination, while the real people in my life saw me as an obligation, an embarrassment, a problem to be managed and eventually solved through strategic distancing and careful social manipulation. The hurt I'd felt listening to Marcus's phone conversation began transforming into something colder and more focused, a crystalline anger that brought with it an unusual clarity about my situation and my options. I'd spent 45 years being the generous father, the selfless provider, the man who always put his family's needs ahead of his own comfort and dignity. I'd allowed them to take and take and take without ever asking for anything in return except basic respect and acknowledgement of my sacrifices, and even that small request had apparently been too much for them to manage. Sitting in that kitchen, surrounded by the fruits of my labor and the evidence of my family's ingratitude, I felt something shift inside me. A fundamental change in how I viewed myself and my relationships, and what I deserved from the people I'd given everything to support and nurture. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about what Marcus needed, or what would be best for Jennifer, or how I could help Emma achieve her goals. Instead, I was thinking about David, about what I wanted and what I deserved and what I had the power to change about my circumstances. The clarity was startling and liberating in a way I hadn't expected, as if I'd been carrying a heavy weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight and breathe freely. I walked to my home office, another room I'd designed and built myself, and sat down at the solid walnut desk where I'd managed my construction business for 20 years, where I'd planned dozens of successful projects and negotiated hundreds of contracts, and built a reputation for excellence and reliability that had made me wealthy enough to support a family that apparently saw that wealth as their birthright, rather than the product of my hard work and sacrifice. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Harold Brennan, the estate attorney who'd helped me set up my will and various legal documents over the years. Harold was old school, a man in his early 60s who'd built his practice on discretion and competence rather than flashy advertising and aggressive self-promotion. More importantly, he understood the value of honest work and had never treated me with anything less than complete professional respect, never made me feel like my background or my wealth's blue-collar origins were anything to apologize for. I dialed his number, and when he answered in his familiar gravelly voice, I told him I needed to schedule an appointment to discuss updating my estate planning documents, that there had been some changes in my family situation that required immediate attention. Harold, being the professional he was, didn't ask for details over the phone, but I could hear the concern in his voice when he offered to meet with me first thing the next morning. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the master bedroom I'd designed, with hand-picked materials and custom fixtures, thinking about legal structures and financial protections, and the various ways a man could ensure his assets were distributed according to his wishes rather than his relatives' expectations. For the first time since Marcus was born, I wasn't planning how to give him something. I was planning how to make sure he couldn't take what he hadn't earned and didn't appreciate. Harold Brennan's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd spent 40 years helping people protect their life's work from ungrateful relatives and incompetent heirs. Understated elegance with an underlying strength that suggested serious business got done within these walls. The leather chairs were worn but comfortable, the bookshelves filled with legal volumes that had clearly been read and referenced rather than displayed for show, and Harold himself radiated the kind of quiet competence that comes from decades of successfully navigating complex family dynamics and financial disputes. When I explained my situation, carefully detailing what I'd overheard and the years of subtle disrespect that had led up to that moment, Harold listened without judgment or interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad with a fountain pen that had probably cost more than most people spent on a car payment. When I finished my account, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with the sharp eyes of a man who'd seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times in his career. "I'm not surprised, David," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of sympathy and professional detachment. "I see this more often than you might think. Successful parents who've sacrificed everything for children who come to view that sacrifice as weakness rather than love, who mistake generosity for obligation and gratitude for entitlement." He explained that from a legal standpoint, my position was actually quite strong, stronger than many people in similar situations, because I'd been careful over the years to keep all my assets in my own name rather than setting up joint accounts or shared ownership arrangements that could complicate matters if family relationships soured. The house was mine, the investment accounts were mine, the retirement funds were mine, and most importantly, I had no legal obligations to provide for my adult son or his family, regardless of what they might have been expecting or planning for their future financial security. "The question," Harold continued, "is what you want to accomplish. Are you looking for a way to express your disappointment while maintaining family relationships? Or are you ready to make more dramatic changes that might permanently alter your connections with Marcus and his family?" I thought about that question for a long moment, remembering the casual cruelty in Marcus's voice when he'd talked about managing my image and finding me an appropriate retirement community where I wouldn't be an embarrassment to his professional ambitions. "I want them to understand that respect and gratitude aren't optional," I told Harold. "I want them to learn what it feels like to lose something valuable because they failed to appreciate what they had." Harold nodded and pulled out a fresh legal pad, his pen poised to begin documenting what would become the most important legal strategy of my life. The next phase of my plan required understanding exactly what my life's work was worth in concrete financial terms, so I contacted Sarah Chen, one of the most respected real estate agents in our area, a woman whose reputation for discretion and professionalism had made her the go-to choice for high-end property transactions throughout the region. When Sarah arrived at my house for the evaluation appointment, I watched her face carefully as she took in the details of the home I'd spent 15 years designing and building room by room, with the kind of attention to detail and quality that most modern construction companies couldn't match at any price point. Her eyes widened as she examined the hand-carved crown molding, the custom millwork, the imported tile work, the solid hardwood floors I'd installed, and finished myself using techniques I'd learned from a master craftsman who'd emigrated from Germany in the 1960s. "Mr. Davidson," she said, running her hand along the smooth surface of the built-in entertainment center I'd crafted from a single piece of black walnut. "This is extraordinary craftsmanship. I've been selling luxury homes for 20 years, and I've rarely seen workmanship of this caliber, especially in a custom-built residence." She spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and documenting every aspect of the property, from the hand-laid stone foundation to the slate roof I'd installed myself, from the gourmet kitchen with its professional-grade appliances and custom cabinetry to the master suite with its vaulted ceilings and handcrafted fixtures. In the workshop behind the house, she marveled at the organizational systems and the collection of professional-grade tools that represented decades of investment in the equipment necessary to create truly exceptional work. "The property sits on 2.5 acres of beautifully landscaped grounds," she noted, taking pictures of the gardens I'd designed and the stone pathways I'd laid, "and the location provides both privacy and convenient access to major transportation routes." When she finished her evaluation and sat down at my kitchen table to discuss her findings, the numbers she presented exceeded even my optimistic expectations. "Based on comparable sales in the area and the unique quality of the construction and finishes," Sarah said, consulting her notes and recent market data, "I would recommend listing the property at $2.3 million, with the expectation that in the current market, we'll likely receive multiple offers above asking price." The irony wasn't lost on me that the house Marcus found embarrassing and unsophisticated was worth more than most people would earn in their entire lifetimes. That the blue-collar craftsmanship he was ashamed to associate with his professional image represented a level of skill and attention to detail that money couldn't buy in today's mass production construction industry. The meeting with my financial advisor, Robert Martinez, revealed the full scope of what 4 decades of disciplined saving and smart investing had accomplished. Numbers that would have shocked Marcus if he'd ever bothered to inquire about my actual financial situation rather than making assumptions based on my work clothes and practical lifestyle. Robert had been managing my portfolio for 15 years. Ever since my construction business had grown successful enough to generate surplus capital that needed professional oversight and strategic planning. He was a serious man who understood that wealth built through physical labor and business ownership required different strategies than inherited money or corporate salaries, and he'd consistently steered me toward investments that provided both growth and security, rather than flashy returns that could disappear in market downturns. "David," he said, reviewing the printouts and account statements spread across his conference table, "your total assets are currently valued at approximately $3.7 million, not including the house, which puts your net worth well above $6 million once we factor in the real estate value." The breakdown was impressive even to me. $1.2 million in retirement accounts that had benefited from decades of maximum contributions and compound growth, $800,000 in taxable investment accounts diversified across stocks, bonds, and real estate investment trusts, $450,000 in cash and certificates of deposit, $180,000 in a collection of gold coins I'd been accumulating as inflation protection, and various other assets, including the business equipment and tools that retained significant value in the used market. "The beauty of your situation," Robert continued, "is that most of your wealth is in accounts and investments that you control completely, with no joint ownership or beneficiary complications. that could create legal challenges if you decide to make changes to your estate planning or asset distribution strategies. He explained how I could restructure my accounts to provide maximum flexibility and protection, setting up trusts and legal entities that would ensure my wealth went exactly where I wanted it to go, when I wanted it to go there, regardless of anyone else's expectations or assumptions about their inheritance rights. If you're concerned about family members making inappropriate claims on your assets, Robert said diplomatically, clearly sensing the underlying tension in my questions without prying into the personal details, there are numerous legal structures we can implement to protect your wishes and prevent disputes or challenges after you're gone. But I wasn't thinking about what would happen after I was gone. I was thinking about what would happen while I was very much alive and finally ready to make decisions based on my own interests rather than everyone else's comfort and convenience. Over the next 2 weeks, I began paying attention to my family's behavior and conversations with the focused intensity I'd once brought to complex construction projects, listening and observing and documenting patterns that had been invisible to me when I was blinded by love and hope and the stubborn belief that blood relationships automatically generated mutual respect and affection. The results were even more devastating than I'd anticipated, revealing a level of casual contempt and calculated manipulation that made Marcus's phone conversation seem mild by comparison. Jennifer had apparently been telling her friends for months that they were managing David's decline, describing me as someone whose judgment and decision-making capabilities were becoming questionable due to age and social isolation, painting herself as the patient and caring daughter-in-law who was protecting the family's interests by gradually taking control of an elderly man who could no longer be trusted to make appropriate choices about his living situation or financial affairs. The cruelty of this narrative was breathtaking in its calculated dishonesty, transforming my independent lifestyle and continued physical and mental vigor into evidence of concerning stubbornness that required professional intervention. Emma, meanwhile, had been telling her friends that she was planning to use grandfather's money to finance not just her college education but also a year abroad, a new car, and various other lifestyle enhancements that she viewed as her natural inheritance rather than generous gifts from someone who had no obligation to provide them. When one of her friends had asked what would happen if I decided to spend my own money on myself instead of saving it for her benefit, Emma had laughed and said, "He won't. He's too old to do anything fun with it anyway, and besides, what else is he going to do with all that money?" The casual assumption that my wealth existed solely for her convenience, combined with the dismissive attitude toward my right to make my own financial decisions, revealed a level of entitlement that shocked me even after everything else I'd learned about my family's true feelings. But it was Marcus's behavior during our last Sunday dinner that provided the final confirmation I needed that my family saw me not as a beloved patriarch deserving respect and gratitude, but as a resource to be managed and eventually harvested for maximum benefit with minimum inconvenience to their own lives and ambitions. Throughout the meal, he kept steering conversation toward topics like retirement planning and the benefits of downsizing, making suggestions about how much easier my life would be if I didn't have the burden of maintaining such a large property, how much more appropriate it would be for someone my age to live in a community designed for seniors with my specific needs and limitations. One of the most satisfying aspects of my research phase was reconnecting with colleagues from my construction days who had gone on to build their own successful businesses, men who understood the value of skilled craftsmanship and who had never forgotten the pride that comes from creating something lasting and beautiful with your own hands. Tommy Rodriguez, who had started as a framing carpenter on one of my first major residential projects, now owned a construction company that specialized in high-end custom homes for wealthy clients throughout the tri-state area. When I called him to catch up and mentioned that I might be interested in relocating to start fresh somewhere new, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "David, you'd be crazy not to make that move," he said, his voice filled with genuine excitement. "There are communities down here in North Carolina where skilled craftsmen are treated like the artists they are, where people understand that real quality costs money and appreciate the difference between mass-produced garbage and work done right." He described a network of contractors, architects, and skilled tradesmen who had created their own informal community, men and women who had built successful businesses based on reputation and quality rather than lowest bid mediocrity, people who understood that a lifetime of experience and skill deserved respect and appropriate compensation. "You could have as much work as you wanted," Tommy continued, "consulting on high-end projects, teaching apprentices who actually want to learn, maybe even taking on a few special projects just for the satisfaction of creating something beautiful." The contrast between Tommy's enthusiasm for my skills and experience and my own family's embarrassment about my background couldn't have been more stark, highlighting just how toxic and destructive my current living situation had become for my sense of self-worth and personal dignity. Mike Sullivan, another former colleague who now ran a successful renovation company in Virginia, had a similar response when I mentioned my potential interest in relocating. "The timing couldn't be better," he told me. "There's a growing appreciation for traditional craftsmanship down here. People who are willing to pay premium prices for work that's built to last, rather than just look good in photographs." He described a community of retirees and professionals who valued quality and authenticity, people who would see my background and experience as assets rather than embarrassments, who would appreciate stories about challenging projects and innovative solutions, rather than viewing such conversations as inappropriate for polite society. "You'd fit right in," Mike assured me. "And more importantly, you'd be around people who understand what you've accomplished and respect what you've built, rather than taking it for granted or apologizing for it." My reconnaissance trips to potential new locations were eye-opening in ways I hadn't anticipated, revealing possibilities for a different kind of life that I'd never seriously considered because I'd been so focused on maintaining family connections and meeting everyone else's expectations that I'd forgotten to think about what might actually make me happy and fulfilled in my retirement years. The mountain communities of North Carolina offered exactly the kind of environment Tommy had described, places where craftsmanship was valued and respected, where successful retirees gathered to share stories and experiences without the artificial social hierarchies that characterized Marcus's professional world. In Asheville, I visited a community center where retired tradesmen gathered weekly to work on projects for local charities, building playgrounds and repairing homes for elderly residents who couldn't afford professional contractors, using their skills to give back to their communities while staying active and engaged with meaningful work. The men I met there were like me, successful, skilled, proud of their accomplishments, and eager to share their knowledge with younger people who showed genuine interest in learning traditional techniques that were becoming lost arts in an era of mass production and corner cutting. They welcomed me immediately when they learned about my background and experience, asking detailed questions about specific projects and techniques, sharing their own stories of challenging builds and innovative solutions, treating my expertise as valuable knowledge rather than embarrassing evidence of low social status. "You'd love it here," said Frank Morrison, a retired master electrician who'd moved to the area 5 years earlier after selling his successful electrical contracting business in New Jersey. "We've got a great group of guys, all professionals who built successful careers with their hands and minds, and we're always working on interesting projects that let us stay active and useful while enjoying the retirement we've earned." The housing options were equally appealing. Custom homes built by local craftsmen who understood quality construction, properties with workshops and storage space for tools and equipment, communities designed around shared interests and values, rather than artificial social distinctions based on job titles and educational credentials. The cost of living was significantly lower than what I was accustomed to, meaning my substantial assets would provide an even more comfortable lifestyle while surrounded by people who appreciated rather than apologized for the work that had generated that wealth. By the end of my third scouting trip, I'd identified the perfect property. A beautiful custom home on 10 acres of wooded land, complete with a professional-grade workshop and enough space to pursue any projects that caught my interest, all priced at less than half what similar properties would cost in my current area. The legal and financial framework Harold had designed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness, a structure that would allow me to disappear from my family's life as completely as if I had never existed, while ensuring that they could never access or challenge the wealth they had taken for granted for so long. The new trust accounts were established in North Carolina, managed by a local bank that specialized in serving relocated retirees who wanted privacy and professional service without the complications that might arise from maintaining financial relationships in their former communities. All of my investment accounts had been quietly transferred to new institutions, with new account numbers and contact information that my family would have no way of discovering or accessing, even if they hired private investigators or forensic accountants to trace my financial activities. The house listing was scheduled to go live on Monday morning, with Sarah Chen handling all inquiries and showings through a process that would minimize the chance of my family learning about the sale before it was too late for them to interfere or create complications. We'll list it as by appointment only initially, Sarah explained, which will create an air of exclusivity while allowing us to control who has access to the property and when. In this market, with a home of this quality, we should have multiple offers within the first week. The moving arrangements were equally discreet. A professional relocation service that specialized in helping people make complete geographic transitions without leaving trails that could be easily followed by family members or business associates who might have reasons to track them down. My new address would remain confidential. My new phone numbers would be unlisted, and my mail would be forwarded through a series of intermediary services that would make it virtually impossible for anyone to determine my actual location without considerable effort and expense. The psychological preparation was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire process, requiring me to accept that I was essentially ending my relationship with my son and his family permanently, that there would be no reconciliation or gradual rebuilding of trust and mutual respect after they discovered what I had done. But every time I wavered or wondered if I was being too harsh, I remembered Marcus's voice on that phone call, the casual cruelty with which he had dismissed my entire life's work as embarrassing and inappropriate, the calculated manipulation involved in planning to warehouse me in a retirement facility to protect his professional image. The decision became easier each time I reminded myself that they had already ended our relationship. I was simply making their rejection official and removing myself from their lives as completely and permanently as they had apparently wanted all along. The response to the house listing exceeded even Sarah's optimistic predictions, with 7 serious inquiries within the first 48 hours and 3 formal offers submitted before the weekend was over, each one representing validation of the quality and value that Marcus had dismissed as embarrassing and unsophisticated. The highest offer came from a couple who owned a successful technology company, people who had made their fortune through innovation and hard work, and who immediately recognized the craftsmanship and attention to detail that made my home unique in a market flooded with mass-produced luxury properties that looked impressive in photographs, but revealed their shortcuts and cheap materials under close inspection. "This is extraordinary work," the husband told Sarah during their second viewing, running his hands along the hand-jointed woodwork in the dining room. "You can't find craftsmanship like this anymore, not at any price. Everything is so perfectly executed, so thoughtfully designed. Whoever built this house was a true master of his craft." His wife was equally impressed with the kitchen, marveling at the seamless integration of modern appliances with traditional woodworking techniques, the way every cabinet door hung perfectly true, every drawer operated with the smooth precision that comes only from meticulous attention to detail and genuine pride in workmanship. "We've looked at dozens of properties in this price range," she told Sarah, "and most of them are just expensive materials slapped together by contractors who care more about speed than quality. This house is different. This house has soul." They offered $2.4 million, $50,000 above the asking price, with a cash down payment that would allow us to close within 30 days, no financing contingencies, no inspection requirements beyond the standard safety and environmental assessments. When Sarah called to give me the news, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy pride that people who understood quality recognized the value of what I'd created, combined with sadness that my own family had never appreciated what these strangers immediately understood. "They specifically asked me to tell you how much they appreciate the craftsmanship," Sarah added. "They said it's clear that this house was built by someone who loves what he does and takes genuine pride in creating something beautiful and lasting." The irony was overwhelming. Complete strangers valued my life's work more than my own son. People who had never met me understood and respected my skills more than the family I'd sacrificed everything to support and nurture. That evening, I walked through the house room by room, remembering the planning and construction process, the challenges overcome, and the satisfaction of solving complex design problems with innovative techniques that had pushed my skills to their limits. This house represented the culmination of everything I'd learned in 4 decades of construction work. Every technique mastered, every mistake learned from, every innovation developed through years of experimentation and refinement. Soon it would belong to people who appreciated its value, while the family that had inherited its benefits without earning or acknowledging them would learn what it felt like to lose something precious because they'd failed to treasure what they had. The final Sunday dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture, watching my family perform their roles as loving relatives while knowing that they viewed me as an embarrassing burden to be managed and eventually discarded when my usefulness expired and my presence became too inconvenient for their social and professional ambitions. I prepared the meal with extra care, using the finest ingredients money could buy, cooking with the same attention to detail I brought to every other aspect of my life, creating what would be our last shared meal, though they had no idea they were participating in a farewell performance. Marcus arrived exactly on time, as always, bringing Jennifer and Emma with their usual air of people fulfilling an obligation rather than enjoying a family gathering, their body language screaming resentment at having to spend their valuable time with someone whose company they clearly found tedious and socially awkward. "Something smells amazing," Jennifer said with her practiced smile, the same polite expression she wore when dealing with service workers and other people she considered beneath her social station. "You always go to so much trouble for us." The word trouble struck me as particularly revealing, suggesting that my efforts to create memorable family experiences were viewed as excessive and unnecessary, rather than expressions of love and generosity. That my desire to maintain family traditions was seen as imposing burdens on people who had better things to do with their time. Throughout the meal, Marcus kept steering the conversation toward his favorite topic, my need for a more appropriate living situation that would relieve me of the burden of maintaining such a large property while ensuring that I received the kind of professional care that someone my age required. "I've been researching some really nice retirement communities," he said, cutting his steak with the surgical precision he brought to legal arguments. "Places where you'd have social activities designed for your age group, professional staff to handle maintenance and medical needs, organized activities that would keep you engaged and active." The clinical language was designed to make his plan sound benevolent and caring. A loving son helping his aging father make practical decisions about his future comfort and security, but I could hear the underlying message. He wanted me warehoused somewhere convenient and socially acceptable, removed from his life, but safely contained, where I couldn't cause embarrassment or require actual attention from him and his family. Jennifer nodded along enthusiastically, adding her own observations about how much easier my life would be without the responsibilities of homeownership, how much more relaxing it would be to have professional staff handle all the daily tasks that might become challenging for someone in my stage of life. The condescension was breathtaking, treating me like a confused child who needed protection from his own poor judgment rather than a competent adult who had successfully managed complex business operations and financial responsibilities for decades. The closing ceremony took place in Harold's office, surrounded by the legal documents that would officially transfer ownership of my life's greatest achievement to people who had never met me, but who understood its value better than my own flesh and blood ever had. The buyers, Michael and Patricia Hartwell, were gracious and respectful throughout the process, asking thoughtful questions about the house's systems and features, requesting contact information for the craftsmen who had helped with specific aspects of the construction so they could maintain the property with the same attention to quality that had gone into its creation. "We want to preserve everything exactly as it is," Patricia assured me, signing document after document with the careful attention of someone who understood the significance of what was happening. "This house is a work of art, and we consider ourselves its custodians rather than its owners." Michael had brought a leather-bound journal containing detailed notes about every aspect of the property, questions about maintenance schedules and recommended service providers, requests for information about the sources of specific materials so that any future repairs or modifications could maintain the integrity of the original design. "I've never seen documentation this thorough," Harold commented, reviewing the inspection reports and architectural drawings Michael had commissioned. "These people clearly understand what they're buying and intend to preserve it properly." The final signature transferred legal ownership of my masterpiece to people who deserved it, while the electronic transfer of $4 million into my new bank account provided the financial foundation for my new life. Resources that would allow me to live comfortably and independently without depending on anyone's generosity or tolerance for my existence. As I handed over the keys, Patricia shook my hand with genuine warmth and respect, thanking me not just for the house, but for the skill and dedication that had made it possible. "You've created something truly special here," she said, her words carrying the kind of appreciation and recognition I'd never received from my own family. "We'll take good care of it, I promise." Walking out of Harold's office as a free man, no longer tied to a place where I'd never been truly valued or respected, I felt lighter than I had in years, unburdened by the weight of constantly trying to earn love and appreciation from people who were incapable of recognizing what they'd been given. The money in my account represented more than financial security. It represented freedom from the obligation to continue sacrificing my dignity and self-respect for people who saw those sacrifices as their natural right, rather than generous gifts from someone who deserved gratitude and consideration in return. My phone was already disconnected, my forwarding address established through a mail service that would protect my privacy, my new life waiting in a community where skilled craftsmanship was valued and respected rather than dismissed as socially embarrassing. The note I left was deliberately brief and understated, designed to convey finality without providing any information that might help them track me down or understand the full scope of what had just happened to their comfortable assumptions about their financial security and inheritance. Expectations. "I've gone to live somewhere I'm appreciated. Don't look for me." 12 words that represented the end of 40 years of one-sided generosity and the beginning of a new chapter focused on my own happiness and fulfillment rather than everyone else's. Convenience and comfort. I placed the note on the kitchen counter where Marcus would be sure to find it when he arrived for our usual Sunday dinner, a meal that would never happen because the kitchen would be empty and the house would belong to strangers who understood its value better than my own son ever had. My truck was packed with only the essentials: clothes, tools, important documents, and a few personal items that held sentimental value unrelated to my family relationships. Everything else, the furniture I'd built, the artwork I'd collected, the household items accumulated over decades of making this house a home, would belong to the Hartwells now. People who would appreciate craftsmanship and quality, rather than viewing them as embarrassing reminders of blue-collar origins. The drive south took 8 hours. 8 hours of gradual liberation from the weight of other people's expectations and judgments. 8 hours of increasing distance from a life that had become a prison of obligations and disappointments. 8 hours of anticipation for the freedom and respect waiting for me in my new community. I drove through the night, watching the familiar landmarks of my old life disappear in the rearview mirror, replaced by new landscapes and possibilities I'd never taken time to explore because I'd been too busy working to support people who saw my efforts as insufficient and my background as shameful. When I crossed the state line into North Carolina, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of relief so profound it was almost physical, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale completely. My new house was ready for occupancy, the utilities connected, the workshop equipped with the tools and equipment I'd need to stay active and engaged with meaningful work, surrounded by neighbors who would value my skills and experience rather than apologizing for them in social situations. The mountain air was clean and fresh, carrying the scent of pine trees and the promise of seasons that would change around me while I built a new identity based on my own values and interests rather than other people's social anxieties and professional insecurities. For the first time in decades, I fell asleep in a bed surrounded by silence, instead of the constant background noise of other people's needs and expectations. My dreams filled with possibilities instead of obligations. Marcus discovered the empty house exactly as I'd planned, arriving for Sunday dinner to find bare rooms, disconnected utilities, and a 12-word note that shattered his comfortable assumptions about his inheritance and financial security in ways that no amount of legal maneuvering could repair or reverse. According to the private investigator I later hired to monitor the situation, his initial reaction was disbelief, a conviction that I'd simply taken a vacation or made some temporary arrangement that would be easily reversed once he applied the appropriate legal and emotional pressure to bring me back into line. He spent the first week calling my disconnected phone numbers and visiting my closed bank accounts, gradually discovering the scope of what I'd accomplished and the finality of the legal and financial structures Harold had created to protect my assets and privacy from family members who might feel entitled to challenge my decisions. The reality hit him when he met with his own attorney and learned that I'd violated no laws and breached no legal obligations in selling my property and relocating my assets, that his assumptions about his inheritance had never been supported by any legal documents or binding commitments that could be enforced through the court system. Your father was under no legal obligation to provide for you or preserve any assets for your benefit, his lawyer explained, delivering the harsh truth that Marcus's sense of entitlement had never been matched by actual legal rights. He was free to dispose of his property in any way he chose, and he appears to have done so in a manner that was both legal and carefully planned to prevent challenges or reversals. Jennifer's reaction was even more dramatic, according to my investigators' reports, progressing from shock to rage to panic as she realized that her lifestyle and social status had been built on financial foundations that had just disappeared permanently and completely. Her friends in the law firm wives' social circle were apparently less sympathetic than she'd expected, treating her situation as embarrassing evidence of poor planning and unrealistic expectations rather than a tragedy deserving support and assistance. She keeps talking about how unfair it all is, my investigator reported, but the people she's complaining to seem to think she should have been more grateful for what she had instead of taking it for granted. Emma's response was perhaps the most revealing, focused entirely on the personal inconvenience of losing access to money she'd never earned but had always expected to receive, with no apparent awareness that her grandfather's disappearance might represent an emotional loss rather than just a financial setback. Her college plans, her car expectations, her study abroad dreams had all been built on assumptions about my generosity that she'd never bothered to acknowledge or appreciate, treating my potential contributions as guaranteed entitlements rather than generous gifts from someone who deserved gratitude and respect in return. 6 months after vanishing from my old life, I can honestly say that I've never been happier or more at peace with my decisions and circumstances, surrounded by people who value my skills and experience, engaged in meaningful work that brings satisfaction instead of obligation, free from the constant weight of other people's expectations and judgments about my worth and social acceptability. The mountain community has welcomed me exactly as Tommy predicted, treating my background and expertise as valuable assets rather than embarrassing secrets to be managed and minimized for social and professional convenience. I've joined the local Craftsmen's Guild, a group of skilled retirees who take on challenging restoration projects for historical societies and wealthy clients who appreciate traditional techniques and attention to detail. Work that pays well, while keeping me active and engaged with the kind of complex problem-solving that has always given me the most satisfaction. My neighbors are successful professionals, business owners, and skilled tradesmen who've built comfortable retirements through hard work and smart financial planning. People who understand the value of honest labor and take pride in their accomplishments, rather than apologizing for the work that made their success possible. When we gather for community events or informal social occasions, conversations focus on shared interests and mutual respect rather than artificial hierarchies based on job titles and educational credentials. Creating an environment where I can be myself completely without worrying about embarrassing anyone or failing to project the appropriate image for someone else's professional ambitions. The house I bought is perfect for my needs and interests, with a professional workshop where I can pursue projects that challenge my skills while contributing to my new community's various charitable initiatives, building playgrounds for local schools and repairing homes for elderly residents who can't afford professional contractors. The financial security provided by the sale of my old house and the careful management of my investment portfolio means I can choose projects based on interest and social value rather than economic necessity, using my skills to give back to a community that appreciates my contributions rather than merely tolerating my existence. Every morning, I wake up in a place where I belong, surrounded by people who respect what I've accomplished and value what I can contribute, free from the toxic dynamics that had turned my old life into a daily exercise in seeking approval from people who were incapable of recognizing the sacrifices that had made their comfortable lives possible. The peace I feel now, the deep satisfaction of living according to my own values and priorities, confirms that leaving was the right decision, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who don't appreciate you is to remove yourself from their lives and let them learn what they've lost through the experience of living without the generosity they took for granted. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.